Get back down and shut your trap. It's time for
Keeping It Sports with M3.
Are you ready?
Are you ready?
Well, I'll need some beer.
Are you ready?
You have to ask me nicely.
Come on now, don't be bashful.
Are you ready? Are you ready for...
Place for the best sports talk and news surrounding each league.
I can prove it with my usual flawless logic.
Hey, man, this time we'll do it my way.
What's your name again?
And now, here's your host, M3, Mike Rosansky. Coming to you from Cherry Hill, New Jersey. It's time for Keeping It Sports with M3, powered by the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everything's going well for you here on this Monday, the 7th day of October, first Monday of the month. Hope you're all having a great day, a great start to your week, whatever it is you may be doing. Hope you're in a better mood than I am today, especially after the nonsense that I watched take place yesterday morning in London on the NFL Network, as it was another miserable loss for my New York Jets. And trust me, there will be plenty of other things that I'm going to touch upon today. Talk a lot about the MLB playoffs, look around week 5 in the NFL, even give you some thoughts on the unfortunate passing of Pete Rose last week that was announced just after I got done recording this podcast. But I'll start with the Jets this week because the only positive I can take away from yesterday is the fact that the game happened so early in the day, 9:30 East Coast time, with them playing in London against the Minnesota Vikings, that I was able to spend the next 12 hours wiping the stench of that out of my mind and just enjoy stress-free football. Didn't take away from any of my annoyance or my angst of what I watched from the Jets in London, but at least it allowed me to somewhat have less angst, less annoyance throughout the rest of that day. Because that was a hideous game to watch. I don't care what the final score read. I don't care how close the Jets were in the end. For the majority of that game, the Jets were awful. The Jets stank. The Jets, you almost wish that they would have been left over there in London, because there's so many problems with this team right now that it really makes you sick to your stomach. And the one part of this team that I will give somewhat of a pass to is the defense, because the defense only gave up 10 points. The defense was fine in that first half. You had the one drive in which they were put in awful field position in the second half, but for the most part, they kept the Jets in the game. The last 2 weeks, they have put the Jets offense in position to win football games. But you watch this Jet offense, you look around and you're like, what the hell is this? Is this 1991? There's so little creativity. There's so little excitement when it comes to this Jet offense, especially when you look at the other side of the playing field. While by no means Sam Darnold was spectacular yesterday, you watch the way Kevin O'Connell coaches up that Vikings team, the way that he schemes ways to get Justin Jefferson open, where it's not a full-on exhausting workout like it is for Garrett Wilson to get the football. And their offense has pretty much become Garrett Wilson or nothing. When you watch Aaron Rodgers drop back and throw over 50 times yesterday, and 22 times he threw Garrett Wilson's way, including a one time where he missed him for what would have been a miraculous comeback touchdown in a game that they would have had no right of winning whatsoever. But you watch this offense. They don't scheme ways to get Garrett Wilson open. The offensive line is not doing a great job protecting Aaron Rodgers. And I don't think it's just a Morgan Moses being out of the lineup situation. All the way up and down this offensive line, they're not creating good enough protection for Rodgers. They're not allowing the run game to be a factor whatsoever. Sometimes you could argue that they give up on the ground game a little bit too early. And that was the case again yesterday, when you consider that it was never truly out of hand scoreboard wise. Even in that second half, when they were able to get back within one score at multiple portions of that game. But you've got two young running backs that everyone's really excited about. And you don't have them on the field ever at the same time. It's almost like a tag team wrestling match where they're tagging in and out constantly. And B, your game plan with them is just trying to bulldoze right up the gut. And how is that working when you have an offensive line that's not creating gaps for them, that's not creating protection for your quarterback or protection for the running back? So the plays are pretty much getting blown up right behind the line of scrimmage. Remember, they went for a 4th and goal in that game and tried to just hand it to Braylon Allen right up the gut. And he got obliterated. He got shut down right in the backfield because the Vikings knew there's no other ground game plan for the Jets other than running the football up the middle. But I'm not going to ignore what was amongst the biggest problems yesterday, besides just the horrible offensive game plan, besides the fact that this coaching staff looks so far over their heads, with Robert Saleh making no in-game adjustments, Nathaniel Hackett not willing to make any adjustments. Let's face it, Nathaniel Hackett is just here because he happened to be the offensive coordinator when Rodgers won his last 2 MVP awards. And that's what we're coming to find out with the Jets as of late. When it comes to their offensive game planning, whether it's offensive coordinators they've had recent years, or you want to even go back to Adam Gase, they only bring in people to run this offense that have some kind of relationship with somebody from within. Whether it be Robert Saleh bringing in Mike LaFleur to be his offensive coordinator the first couple of years he was here, or now having Nathaniel Hackett, who is only here because he was Aaron Rodgers' coffee boy at one time in Green Bay. Or go back to when Adam Gase was the head coach of this team, and he was brought in as a favor from Christopher Johnson toward Peyton Manning for some reason. Whatever the case may be, they have had 3 consecutive offensive play callers that lack any inspiration whatsoever, that have no creativity whatsoever. You watch the rest of these teams around the league, they have all these pre-snap movements. You're watching ways, just as I said, scheming ways to get their number 1 wide receivers open. And you don't see any of that from the Jets. You don't see any kind of fun, cool, weird stuff from the Jets to catch the other teams off balance. It is a very simplistic, old school offense that they look very prehistoric running. But Aaron Rodgers yesterday, as much as I love him, let's face it, he was hideous. And I give the guy a lot of credit. The fact that he has, the entire time he's here, placed blame on himself. He's never been a finger pointer at one specific person, although there are times you can read between the lines, especially last week after Denver, where you could see that he's really getting fed up with Robert Saleh. Hell, yesterday I think you could see he's getting a little bit fed up with Nathaniel Hackett, with some of the motions that he's doing toward him at the sidelines. He has taken accountability for the most part. But let's face it, Aaron Rodgers was awful yesterday. Aaron Rodgers throwing 3 interceptions, including 2 on back-to-back drives, the first of which was a pick 6 by Andrew Van Ginkel that he didn't even see him coming. Some of that you blame on the offensive line. Some of that you blame on Rodgers not reading the defense as well as we've seen him in the past. And then you come back the very next play, he's getting picked off by Bynum on the deep shot to Lazard, who another guy I'm getting rather sick of seeing with this offense. But Rodgers' accuracy, it's one thing for his arm strength to be down, but what we've always known Aaron Rodgers to be is a very accurate quarterback and a guy that doesn't throw many interceptions. But his accuracy yesterday was awful, whether it be short hopping it on a couple of plays to Wilson and Mike Williams, or overthrowing some wide receivers. You're watching, you're wondering, is Father Time catching up from Aaron? Or is this just a case of him being rusty, still coming off of the Achilles injury? Or is this the pressure that Brian Flores and that defense are putting on Aaron Rodgers? I think it's somewhere in the middle of those three. But the Jets are screwed if you get just an average Aaron Rodgers. If you get the kind of Aaron Rodgers that he was in his last year in Green Bay, then yeah, we could talk about them being a playoff team. But if we're talking Aaron Rodgers' body is now realizing he's 40 years old and he can't do it, then this is all going to blow the F up right in their freaking faces. And the sickening part about it, despite the fact that they had no offensive productivity in their first 6 drives of the game yesterday. Typically these teams come out with scripted game plans, and the first 15 to 20 plays are scripted, and they figure things out from there. Whereas the Jets, you watch them 3 and out, interception, turnover on downs, and then a punt on 4 plays before they get a gift from the Vikings before halftime and were able to salvage some kind of points to make this somewhat competitive in the second half. Their game plan was awful. You saw continuous penalties from this team, especially with penalties by this secondary, and it was the secondary that got beat up throughout the game. You lost Sauce Gardner. Not sure if he's got a concussion. Michael Carter left this game, so you were really down to Eccles and Hall in that secondary. But this was just not anything to take home, be proud of, nothing to really be inspired by. They've got to wake the hell up, because everybody's job is on the line here. Everybody is facing their lack of immortality when it comes to this season. And you've got another one of these difficult stretches coming up here where you look, you've got 4 games in a 17-day span, starting with the Bills next Monday. And the Bills got to be pissed after losing consecutive games. Not sure if they'll have Josh Allen for that game. But after that, you go play Pittsburgh, who's started to come down to earth again. And the Patriots, who not sure what to expect out of this team. I mean, they did just lose their 3rd in a row yesterday, but they can be feisty at home on defense before you've got a Thursday night meeting on Halloween night against the Texans. This is a very difficult stretch coming up this month. Not so much on the middle opponents, but more so when you consider the number of games that are lumped into this short span. So just got to start figuring things out here. They've got to change up this game plan. Get both of these running backs in the mix here. It can't be just Garrett Wilson or bust. Clearly, Allen Lazard is a bust. I'd like to see Mike Williams involved more in this. Stop babying him, take the training wheels off, and get him in the mix here. But if you're going to keep being simplistic, uncreative with this offense, you've pretty much got to out-talent people. I'm not sure if that's going to lie in these rumors coming true of them possibly getting Davante Adams. And it's clear that Davante is going to be traded at some point this month, with the fact that he's almost telling the Raiders in the last week that I'm never playing another game for you. So you figure at some point there's going to be some fire to all of this smoke. But the Jets have given up so many resources, so much time that they've put into this, even though they could have came into this with a better plan at coaching, that this has to work out. There's no 5-year plan. There's no 6-7 years down the road. This is a now or never situation because you're starting over if this doesn't work out. And right now we're heading toward the direction of it not working out. When you see how this team has lost a winnable game at home last week to the Broncos, a game they should have won, and then coming out uninspired, unprepared against the Vikings, something that you put at the feet of the head coach, but at the same time, you just can't give the quarterback a free pass for the awful performance he put forward there yesterday. Things have got to change, and they've got to change really quickly. All right, a lot I want to get to today. Give you some thoughts on the MLB playoffs. Mix in a lot of other things that went down in Week 5 as well. And, of course, give you some thoughts on the passing of the hit king, Pete Rose, last week. So, plenty to get to over the next about 40 minutes or so here. I'll see if I can keep my sanity throughout this. And like I tell you guys each and every single week at this time, please sit back, relax, hell, put your feet up if you feel like it, and continue keeping it sports with M3.
I'll be back.
It really stinks sometimes that I'm only doing this podcast once a week, because there are times where something happens immediately after the podcast as I'm in the editing mode, and I'll be leaving this building and hearing about that. I'm like, damn, I wish I had known during the podcast so that I could have talked about this, so that I could have given some thoughts and opinions about that. But unfortunately, a little while after I got done recording last week's podcast, we would find out about the passing of the hits king, Pete Rose. Pete Rose, who, to baseball fans everywhere, you have a lot of mixed feelings about him, a lot of mixed emotions about him, because he was a very, very complicated figure. On one hand, the player, there was no better competitor in the history of this sport. There was no one that was more aggressive, more tenacious, and that brought it on a given night more than Pete Rose. There were some fiery guys in this history of this sport, but no one could say that they treated each and every single night as if it was their last game in MLB like Pete Rose did. I mean, think about it. Back in the 70s, he ended Ray Fosse's career in an All-Star game by running him over at home plate. The All-Star game we're talking about here. And you look at the miles of accomplishments this guy completed throughout his baseball career. Was the league MVP in 1973. Won the World Series with the Cincinnati Reds in back-to-back seasons in the 70s. Some still to this day consider that the greatest offense in the history of the sport, the Big Red Machine. He was just an unbelievable player, did it at multiple positions. Remember, started off at second base, moved to the outfield, and then would settle in more so in his career at third and first base. But he was a lifetime 300 hitter. He passed Ty Cobb in September of 1985 for the most hits in the history of Major League Baseball. I think about it. He completes this feat, and afterwards, he gets a call from the president. He's sitting there talking to the president of the United States about this grand accomplishment. But as a great and beloved a player as he was, unfortunately, a lot of that gets taken away by the things that happened after his playing days. Whether it be when he was a manager, and we would come to find out that he was gambling on the games. Gambling on games for the Reds to win between the years of 85 and 87, as far as we know. But gambling on games, something that has long been considered the biggest no-no in the sport, even bigger than drugs, even bigger than steroids, whatever you want to throw in there, other than, I think, maybe raping a woman or a child. That is considered the worst thing that someone in the sport could do. Even after he got suspended, he acted like an outright ass about it when you consider all the years he spent trying to deny it. And even with guys that were his friends, guys that were his teammates, like Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, they would go to bat for him, trying to get him to just come out and admit it, come out and tell the truth. Maybe that will get you forgiven, get your lifetime ban lifted, and get you to have your rightful place in Cooperstown in the Hall of Fame. He would make a spectacle of it every year after the suspension, show up about a block down the street from Cooperstown where they're having the Hall of Fame ceremony, and at the same time be holding an autograph session each and every year. Did it for about 20 years until he finally came clean in his book in the early 2000s and was like, yeah, you know what? I did it. I screwed up. I effed up. And from there, he started to be somewhat forgiven by society. Remember, he got jobs on Fox and other broadcast partners, being part of the postseason. Through MLB's permission, he was allowed to be part of certain events that the Cincinnati Reds would hold, including when they voted him into the team's Hall of Fame in 2016, and before his retirement in 2015, Bud Selig, the commissioner at the time, allowed Pete Rose to participate in the festivities at the 2015 All-Star Game held there in Cincinnati. Him being not in the Hall of Fame, it also shows why MLB is hypocrites, because they allow him to be part of all of this stuff. They make money off of certain items of his, including his MVP helmet from 73, the bat he used when he had that hitting streak in 78 for 44 consecutive games, and the cleats he wore in 85 when he became the game's all-time hit leader, all of that is in the Hall of Fame, but he can't be voted into the Hall of Fame. And now, unfortunately, with him passing, he's going to be postpartum voted into the Hall of Fame in all likelihood by the writers, even though all along they should have grown a you-know-what and decided, you know what, we know what he did was wrong, gambling on the game. But that doesn't take away from what kind of player he was. We're going to put him in so that we don't have to live with the guilt of him not going into the Hall of Fame after dying. You have guys in the Hall of Fame that have admitted to steroid use. You have guys in the Hall of Fame who are some of the worst human beings alive in all of these Hall of Fames. But this guy, who the worst thing that we know of with him, I know there's some allegations elsewhere of an unidentified woman claiming that they had a sexual relationship before she turned 16 back in the 70s. And I still don't know all the details on that. I'm not sure if I want to know all the details on that. But this guy was as great a player as you could possibly ask for. That some of his off-the-field discretions, should we put them, should not take away from what should have been a Hall of Fame career. And now it's going to get acknowledged only because he passed away. It's a shame. It shows what kind of hypocrites MLB and the writers are. I mean, they'll put in people like David Ortiz, who failed steroid tests, and other guys that were admitted PD users, or guys that were analytically driven, but they won't put in the greatest hitter of all time. It's a shame, and something that his family, personally, if I were them, I'd snub my nose at the Hall of Fame if they try to induct him now, because you've made so much money off of this guy, and now, only now, you're going to put him in? Shame on you, MLB. Now, what MLB can be proud of is the fact that the baseball playoffs so far have been so much fun, so amazing to watch. They say that nothing beats the Stanley Cup playoffs. I think MLB is making a run for their money as far as challenging the NHL for best playoffs in 2024, because you look at, even in that first round, the wild card round, you had a lot of drama, whether it be the amazing fun story that is the Detroit Tigers continuing on and sweeping out the Houston Astros, a team that a lot of people thought could still, even playing in the wild card round, be a favorite to make to the World Series. Or the fact that there seems to be no killing the New York Mets. The Mets seem to be an unstoppable freight train right now with what we're seeing out of this team, because there have been so many moments in this last week where they could have just gone it away and died, where they could have just faded to obscurity, whether it be the unfairity of having to play that doubleheader last week in Atlanta that kind of screwed up their pitching staff coming into this, having this situation where their bullpen had to get used up so much in that doubleheader. Some of that you can blame on Mendoza with the way that he used Edwin Diaz in game one of that doubleheader. But for this Mets team to overcome that, win the first game of that doubleheader, which I told you was oh so important. I told you that if they were going to advance beyond the wild card round, or even get to the wild card round, they had to win that first game of that doubleheader, because then some of the demons of their history against Atlanta might have crept in if Diaz blew that game and they had not come back against Johnson in the ninth inning in the fashion that they did. But you look at it, every night they've seemed to have a hero that comes to save them. It was more of a group effort in Game 1 against the Milwaukee Brewers. Then you have the slip up in Game 2. I can understand Mendoza's mentality around not using Edwin Diaz in that game, which I don't know why you would ever bring him in the middle of an inning anyway. That's when he seems to struggle the most. But for them to rebound and come off the deck the way that they did in Game 3, when it's scoreless going into the 7th inning, and you see Jake Bauers come off the bench, hit a go-ahead home run. On the very next pitch, Sal Frederick hits a home run off of Budo. And you're starting to think from there, oh, the Mets are screwed. They had no offense whatsoever. They seemingly had sleptwalked through this game, or not backing up Quintana one bit. And that they come off the deck with some clutch hitting. Start off by their leader, Lindor, and get them in a spot where Pete Alonso, who had been awful throughout that series, has his one shining moment to send the Mets on their way to Philadelphia for the division series. Even me, who had no rooting interest in that series, I'm sitting there, I'm like, damn, Pete Alonso finally with a big hit in a big spot after what's been an awful walk year for him. He can erase a lot of those demons and save himself with a big postseason here. Helps this Mets team get to this series against Philadelphia. And still, a lot of heroes along the way here as well. Getting the Mets to this split. Getting the Mets to a point where you're coming back to Citi Field for a Game 3 tomorrow in a 1-1 scenario against your rival, the Phillies. And they looked dead in the water once again on Saturday. Zach Wheeler shutting them down for 7 innings, but we've seen it so many times over the years where these stud starters will shut an opposition down, and the second that they leave the game, no matter how good your bullpen is, no matter how good a season the likes of Jeff Hoffman or Matt Strom have had, the Mets look at it and say, thank you very much, and went to town off of those guys and just went on a relentless assault against them. They come out firing yesterday, but the Met bullpen showed their ugly heads once again. And that's what I think is going to possibly be the bugaboo for this team in this postseason. Especially as you go along here, whether it's they get by the Phillies and take on whoever survives the war between the Padres and the Dodgers. And trust me, that's going to be a war. You saw how feisty it got last night, beyond just fans acting like asses and throwing things from out of the stands. You're watching the interaction there between Jack Flaherty and Machado, Jack Flaherty and Profar. And at some point you think maybe things are going to explode there in that series. But this Met bullpen, for what you've seen from Maton in Game 2 against the Brewers, or what you saw from Diaz now twice in the last week, highlighted yesterday once again, which I don't understand what Mendoza was doing with his use of Diaz there. At some point, you've got to trust Budo. I understand in these first couple games of the postseason, you've seen a lot of sense of urgency from these teams, and they've been going in and out with relievers, switching guys in and out. Hell, you watch the Yankees-Royals on Saturday night, and it was a parade from the dugout to the mound, getting guys in the final 4 innings of that game. But to use Diaz in the 7th inning, when you know he's not going to finish the game there, and you know at some point that Harper and Castellanos and company are going to have a response, why are you bringing in a guy who struggles with dealing with runners on base as it is is beyond me, is something that I just don't quite understand there, especially when you had all the momentum in the world there. Yes, I know Severino slipped up a little bit in the sixth inning, but you figure that the Phillies were going to have a response. You've got to see if you can get outs from Buto. You can't just mentally fry this kid after he was one of your strongest relievers throughout the season. Because then you use Diaz in that spot, it leaves you in a place where you're sitting on your hands saying a prayer in the later stages of the 8th inning and the 9th inning. And you saw what happened when McGill eventually gave up the game-winning hit to Nick Castellanos. There were only so many heroics that you were going to get out of that game with the 2 home runs from Vientos, including the game tire in the 9th inning. But the Mets, they're in a very solid spot here. Yes, you have to face Nola tomorrow night. But you're going back home. You're playing against a Phillies team that you did very well against in the month of September. And who knows? Maybe things break right for you. You can have a very special October here because the Phillies bullpen is nothing to brag about. You look at the Padres, they were dealt a very serious blow over the weekend when they found out that Joe Musgrove is going to miss the rest of this year and all of next year due to Tommy John surgery. And quite frankly, I don't know who pitches for the Dodgers anymore beyond Jack Flaherty and Yamamoto. They're not going to have Kershaw, don't have Glass now. Walker Buehler, who knows what you get out of him. So some of these pitching staffs are just a complete mess. And with all of the spirit that is behind this Mets, the good vibe, the good karma, maybe, just maybe, they could have a very fun October here.
I'll be back.
Does the NFL have zero common sense to them whatsoever? I'm watching the Bills-Texans yesterday as I'm trying to take my mind off of the Jet game. That was the center of my attention in that 1 o'clock time span, especially on the red zone. And late in that game, I watched Josh Allen have his head bounce off the field. And he comes out of that game thinking, oh, he's done for the rest of the game. He looks toast there. And it wasn't a great performance by him by any means. But 3 minutes later, the Bills get the ball back in the red zone. It looks like Mitchell Trubisky is going to come out and run the offense from. All of a sudden, you see Allen come flying out of the tent, grab his helmet, be like, yeah, I'm back. Here we go. Let's go. Let's do this. I'm like, how are you letting this kid right back into the game like that? He missed all of about 3 minutes of it game time. You got to tell me he's right with how he was laying on the floor there for a few minutes? How many times have we got to watch these guys get smacked off the ground like that before you start taking better care of them? I mean, we already have the scare that's going on with Tua Tagovailoa, and we have no idea when he's coming back. And you just let Allen prance his way back into the game like that. I hope that the league, and I'm not just saying this because the Bills are playing the Jets next Monday night. I'm saying this because I don't want to see Josh Allen turn out like Tua Tagovailoa. I don't want to see him turn out like so many of these guys before him where you see his career get messed up based on concussion problems or not following protocol correctly. I hope that the league does a full investigation into how the Bills and the in-game staff that was on hand for that handled that situation, because that just seemed very reckless, seemed very ridiculous by the Bills, the way they handled it. And quite frankly, that was an all-around reckless day for the Buffalo Bills. They had no offense in the first half. I mean, you look at it. They punted the ball 5 times and settled for a field goal right before half. And then in the second half, even when the Texans had very little offense to speak of, their offense seemed to kind of die down after Nico Collins left with that hamstring injury. The Bills were never able to capitalize. You saw probably the worst day that Josh Allen has had in the regular season over the last 3 years. And then the questionable coaching by McDermott and company in the final couple of minutes there. You get the ball back with about 45 seconds to go. You're backed up on your goal line, and Allen is just chucking up Hail Marys left and right, not using up the clock or forcing the Texans to completely use up their timeouts, not at least saving for overtime. And you give the Texans the ball right back with 15 seconds to go, knowing that all they have to do was get maybe 5 yards, and they're right there in position for Kyle Fairbairn to hit a game-winning field goal, in which he did. And you're the Bills looking up at 2 consecutive really bad losses. One where you got smacked around and bullied around by the Ravens, and then yesterday where you coached stupid, you failed to protect your quarterback, and he had some poor decision-making late in that game. Who knows? Maybe it was based off of the head injury or head issue that he had late in the fourth quarter there, and we'll see if it has any carryover effect going to play the Jets next week. We're starting to see a little bit of a carryover effect from 2 teams in this league where maybe it just doesn't get going for them this year. Maybe it just is not their year. And it's understandable in the case of the Los Angeles Rams, because the Rams have dealt with more injuries than anybody in this league, losing multiple offensive linemen. You're without your 2 best weapons on offense, with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua still out with injuries. It sounds like Kupp is closer than Nacua, but remains to be seen when that they could be back. They pretty much have to play a perfect game to survive. They have to be dead on accurate, and Matthew Stafford cannot have any of his occasional turnover problems for this team to win football games. But I'm sorry, there is no excuse for the Cincinnati Bengals being 1-4 right now. I don't want to hear this nonsense of, oh, the Bengals are always slow starters, they'll get going, yada, yada, yada. No, you got all of your players available. The only guy you lost during this offseason was Joe Mixon to the Texans, and you let him go. Your defense has played like garbage. You are getting blown over left and right. And the worst part about it is you have 3 occasions yesterday in that second half where you had a 10-point lead, and you never were able to slam the door on the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens, who look like they were giving that game away at the end of the first half, look like you had awakened a beast in Joe Burrow and company. But every single time that the Bengals took a 10-point lead, the Ravens would immediately respond with a touchdown drive of their own. And then you keep giving teams chances like that, you keep giving them the opportunity to respond, they're eventually going to kick that door down and steal it away from you. Whether it be Joe Burrow trying to hit Chase for what would have been a possibly game-ending first down with a couple minutes to go there in Ravens territory, he gets picked off by Humphries. And the Ravens were able to follow with a field goal there that gave them some life, gave them a chance to breathe, gave them a chance to get back in this game. Or minutes before that, where you had maybe the most remarkable touchdown pass of this entire season, because Lamar Jackson fumbles the initial snap, recovers it. He's running toward the sidelines, got two guys right up in his face as he's falling out of bounds, and is still able to hit Isaiah Likely in the back of the end zone for the touchdown. That, to me, that should have been your wake-up call, Bengals. That should have been your moment where you're like, uh-oh, we might be screwed here because, yeah, we're at home, but there is no true advantage for us. There's no lockdown defense here. There's no fan base that is going to frighten or terrify this Ravens group. They just kept coming and coming and coming. And eventually, you give a team with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry enough chances, and they're just going to punch you in the face. Yeah, they screwed up with how they handled their first drive in overtime. But you gave them a reprieve when you were unable to control the hold there, when Rayco failed to get the snap correctly, and it led to Evan McPherson missing a 53-yard field goal. And from there, you just kind of had the feeling it's over. You don't know how it's going to happen. Well, it's going to be Lamar through the air, Lamar with his legs, or Derrick Henry, who is showing that he's got no tread on those tires. He's showing that he is as great and as dominant as you could ever ask for, going past the 10,000-yard mark yesterday and set them up for that walk-off field goal by Justin Tucker, who, by his own admission, has not been as great as he typically is. But you give the kid a lot of credit for the fact that when he needs to make them, he has been still as consistent a kicker as you can ask for in this league. And that might be one of those games where you look up, if you're the Bengals at the end of the year, and you say, you know what, we really may have shot ourselves in the foot, because going to play the Giants at MetLife next week is no gimme, especially with how the Giants handled adversity yesterday afternoon, and going to Seattle being without Malik Neighbors, without your lead running back, and still were the more physical, the more dominant team. Were able to block a field goal at the end and shock that Seattle crowd and come away with a 9-point victory. That's no gimme anymore. Despite how inconsistent Daniel Jones can be, that may be a game where the Bengals are fighting for their season next Sunday night. Was very happy for Caleb Williams yesterday, the performance that he had. And that had to be such a kick in the you-know-what moment for the Carolina Panthers, because you gave away so much to the Chicago Bears to draft Bryce Young. And think about it. Bryce Young, 3 games into his second year in the league, has been benched by his rookie head coach, Dave Canales. You're going with a veteran backup in Andy Dalton. And then the Chicago Bears come in, who you traded them DJ Moore. You traded your first-round pick that year and your first-round pick the following year to move up to get Bryce Young. And so far, he looks like a bust. You allowed the Bears to draft possibly their forever quarterback. And what happens? They come into Soldier Field on Sunday afternoon and just flat out smack you around. Leave you saying to yourselves, oh, what could have been? So I felt very good for Caleb Williams, because he struggled the first couple of weeks of his rookie year. I think a lot of people put too much pressure on him to come in and instantly be the second coming of Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers. And we're seeing with these rookie quarterbacks, it's not that easy, despite how easy Jaden Daniels is making it and how he's already looking like a runaway winner, despite it being only 5 games, for the Offensive Rookie of the Year award, and how we're already talking about him as an MVP candidate, especially with how the Commanders are 4-1 and are in full control of that NFC East right now with all the problems that you see with the other teams around them. It wasn't going to just be a cakewalk for the Bears and Caleb Williams. They've got talent around him. He's coming in to not the greatest coaching staff in the world, but at least he's got weapons and talent around him. And hopefully this coaching staff can do right by him and not just try to fit him into their scheme, but adjust their scheme to his strength and adjust their scheme to what he does well. So many of these teams, I've seen it plenty of times with my Jets, try to make a young quarterback into what they want to be rather than adjust and develop that quarterback and bring out their best attributes based on the things that they can fit their scheme around this kid. And speaking of Jaden Daniels, that isn't even the major talking point coming out of that Commanders victory yesterday. Yeah, the Commanders, they continue to dominate. The Commanders show that even when they aren't getting the job done through the air, they can dominate through the ground. I mean, they ran right down the Cleveland Browns' throat yesterday, including Jaden Daniels himself, who is not just being a gunslinger, not just being a guy that will throw the ball deep. Yeah, he'll go over and recommend at times certain things to Cliff Kingsbury, but he knows when to take off and use his legs at the same time. The real story coming out of that game is the Carolina Panthers may be off the hook potentially for making the worst trade in NFL history with all they gave up to get Bryce Young and what they've allowed the Bears to have in getting Caleb Williams. Because Cleveland is in the worst quarterback situation, bar none, of anybody with what they have in Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson, who, if you remember at one time, we were making comparisons between him and Patrick Mahomes. They both came out of the same draft class, and we thought that this kid was one of the future stars of this game. And since going to Cleveland, he has been nothing but a mess. I don't know if it's the off-the-field drama that has gotten to him, if he's out of shape, whatever it may be. Deshaun Watson looks like a broken quarterback. And Kevin Stefanski looks like a head coach who has no control whatsoever because he has to keep running Deshaun Watson out there, even despite his eyes and his brain telling him that this is not the guy. This is not the guy that should be leading our offense, and that right now Jameis Winston would probably give you a more competitive chance at winning football games than what you are seeing out of Deshaun Watson. Especially when you consider all 5 games this year, he is under 200 passing yards. He is getting hit left and right. He's not shown a lot of mobility. He's had some of the dumbest turnovers that you can imagine, although Will Levis is saying each and every single week, hold my beer. This looks like another mess for the Cleveland Browns. And the shame of it all is it's not even like they could draft a quarterback to fix this. They're stuck with this guy. He's under guaranteed money for at least the next 2 years, and it would be a severe cap hit that front office does not want to pay if they were to cut him or move on from him. It's a shame because when this kid came out of Clemson, he looked like one of the brightest talents in the sport. But he has had so many things that not go his way, a lot of which that he has created, especially off the field. And now he just looks like a lost cause. You see him walking off the field yesterday, getting in stare downs, getting in arguments with Stefanski. It's just a total mess out there in Cleveland. And they look like they're going to be either everybody's doormat or everybody's get-well game for the time being, unless all of a sudden Deshaun Watson snaps out of it and turns into the Houston Texans version of Deshaun Watson, rather than this scrub that we've watched him be now for the last 2 years.
I'll be back.
I was mentioning during that last segment that there are a couple of teams that maybe it just may not be their year. Maybe it's not the year for things to be right for them. The Bengals, the Rams, a lot of injuries going on there. A lot of off-the-field nonsense with the Bengals, including Jamar Chase's contract situation. But another one of those teams that just may not get going here is the San Francisco 49ers, as they had their second really bad loss of the season yesterday. For the second time this season, we're only 5 weeks in, they blew a double-digit second-half lead to an in-division opponent, this time at home to the Arizona Cardinals. And some of this, you say, oh, it's bad luck because they lost their kicker, Jake Moody. Oh, that shouldn't be the ultimate deciding factor in this. It shouldn't lead to Kyle Shanahan making stupid decisions like going for a 4th and 23 on the 27-yard line. You allowed your punter to make a 26-yard field goal in the first half. Why not give them the try there? Even if you miss the kick, the Cardinals weren't doing anything overly impressive. You had one real drive that kind of gave the Cardinals life, but you're up by 10 points there. It's not like you were in a do-or-die scenario, but you gave them some life. You gave them a chance to breathe. And I've said before, you give some of these teams that we view as underdogs, that we view as kind of patsies, a chance to breathe, they're going to say, you know what? Hey, we got a shot here. We can make some things happen here. I know this 49ers offense, which was so dominant in the first half, completely disappeared, completely fell apart in the second half. Now, you could argue that they were playing with fire all day long, when the fact that they got in the red zone 6 times and came away with 1 touchdown. And probably the most costly of them all was when in the fourth quarter, Jordan Mason lost that fumble that gave the Cardinals the ball at the 8 and allowed them to keep the game within 2 points, allowed them to drive down the field and get the go-ahead field goal. The Cardinals in the second half, they had 2 very long, methodical drives that kind of took the wind out of the 49ers. Will it be the 12-play touchdown drive or that game-winning field goal drive that were 14 plays? That can wear on a defense. That can wear on a team. Eventually, they were not able to get enough stops, not able to provide the offense the opportunity to just slam the door on this game. And Brock Purdy was not his typical protective of the football self. He had a couple of interceptions in this game, including the one early in the third quarter that allowed the Cardinals to start building a little bit of momentum. So you look at the 49ers, some of the injuries they've had so far. Kittle and Debo have each missed a game. We haven't even seen McCaffrey. There's been times they've been without Trent Williams. They're still without Greenlaw on that defense. The 49ers could be facing what we saw the Eagles face last year, and that's losing the Super Bowl and having a hangover into the next year, where, to me, no team faced as much pressure as them coming into this year, and they may be squandering what's their last ride with this group. Now, speaking of teams with pressure, I put the pressure on my New York Yankees last week, and I think the pressure has to be ratcheted up now as we get going with the game 2s of the ALDS this afternoon, with Guardians Tigers and then Yankees Royals following that up at 7 o'clock. As the American League right now, it's the Yankees versus the American League Central. They want to get to the World Series. There's no Baltimore Orioles, who were their demon during the regular season. There's no Houston Astros, who we know have been that ghost that's hovered over the Yankees, eliminating them from the postseason 4 times in the last decade. No. None of these teams are the Twins, where they're just going to roll over and die. But the opportunity is right there in front of you. And you're going to have a lot better of an offensive display from the Yankees to get through not just this series against the Royals, but the American League playoffs in general, than what you saw from them on Saturday night. Because, let's face it, the Kansas City Royals gave away the game to the Yankees. I know the Yankees had some big hits. The game-tying singles by Wells and Verdugo. Early on, you had a 2-run homer by Gleyber Torres. You had some moments there. But they were 2 for 13 with runners in scoring position. They left a country mile on the base paths. Hell, the Royals asked the Yankees to blow them out of this game in the 5th inning, with the fact that they were constantly between 3 pitchers, between Waka, Zerpa, and Schreiber, walking the ballpark. And the Yankees never got that big hit. They had 1 hit in that entire inning, and that was a setup single by Juan Soto. Other than that, it was walk, single, walk, ground out to the catcher, fielder's choice, a walk. That's how they got the lead in that inning. It wasn't any Bronx Bombers. There weren't any big, majestic shots by Judge or Stanton. And you're going to need these guys to start getting hits. You're going to need these guys to start putting up big offensive displays here. And it's going to be tough these next couple of games, because these next 2 games, you're going up against the best 2 pitchers that the Kansas City Royals can throw at you in Reagans and Lugo, both of whom are going to be on full regular rest. Those guys don't walk batters. Those guys don't give free, easy passes. Those guys, for a reason, were all-star caliber pitchers this past season. And I said it last week, Judge had a lot of pressure coming into this postseason on his shoulders, but this lineup in general has pressure on them. You can't just rely on the Kansas City Royals to walk you 8 times a game and think that's going to get the job done. Because not every night is Clay Holmes going to be shut down in this postseason. Not every night are you going to be able to go to Luke Weaver for 4-out saves. He's not going to be Mariano Rivera for the entire postseason. There's going to be some nights where you have to pit up big offensive displays and blow the other team out. You're going to have to win some games 10-6 or 11-5, somewhere along that range. You're going to have to challenge some of these pitching staffs and not let them just make it easy for you. Because whether it's this Royals staff here, or you get by this round and have to play the Guardians, we know how tough they can be. We saw how fiery they came out against the Tigers in Game 1. The Tigers now going to be countering with Skubal here in Game 2 and see if they can tie up that series. The Yankees have got to show some offensive life here. They did not put Jason Dominguez in the lineup based off of his defense, and they valued Alex Verdugo's defense, and he rewarded them with that. Get a couple of hits on Saturday night, including what would be eventual game-winning RBI single in that 7th inning. But at what point are we going to hold Anthony Volpe to that same kind of accountability? At what point do we stop babying him and start putting some pressure on him? Because let's face it, it's not been pretty offensively for him this year. And hell, he even made a very crucial defensive mistake in the middle of this game that allowed the Kansas City Royals in the top of that 6th inning to retake the lead here. And in the postseason, you can't just be okay with those blunders from a guy who's not going to give you anything offensively. It's a little bit of hypocrisy there from the Yankees, if you ask me. But the Yankees offense needs to wake up, people. They're not going to just be able to win it on pitching. They're not going to be able to win it on the other team walking them. You need Judge, Soto, Stanton, Wells, Torres. You need the Bronx Bombers to be the Bronx Bombers if they want to end this drought and finally get their 28th World Series championship. And that, my friends, was Keeping It Sports with M3 for Monday, October 7th, 2024. Everyone, please have a great night. Have a fun, safe, happy, healthy week. You get one life, people, so you might as well try to live it up. And I'll talk to you guys again, same time, next week. Until then, peace.
We have to go. Good night, everybody.
I have had enough of you!
Thank you for all the fun. Thank you. Hey, shut up, will ya?
I don't want to see you, I don't want to hear you, I don't want to smell you. Now leave. I'll be back.